The trophy hunt. What the Soviet Red Army had that the Nazis wanted badly. World War II is one of those topics that never gets old. It's a story of epic battles, incredible courage, and game-changing technology. When we think about the Eastern Front, where Nazi Germany faced off against the Soviet Union, there's this popular idea that the German army, the Wehrmacht, was some unstoppable high-tech juggernaut, while the Soviet Red Army was barely scraping by with outdated gear and not enough boots to go around. You've probably heard the stereotype, one rifle for 3 soldiers, right? Well, buckle up, because we're about to flip that narrative on its head. Today, we're diving deep into what the Red Army had that was so good, the Germans were desperate to get their hands on it. From tanks that changed the game to weapons that ruled the battlefield and even winter gear that kept soldiers alive, the Soviets had some serious advantages. We'll break down the history, throw in some economic context, and add my own thoughts to keep you hooked. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a story of ingenuity, survival, and why the underdog came out on top. Let's get started. The Hollywood version versus reality. If you've watched war movies, you might picture German soldiers decked out in slick uniforms, armed to the teeth with cutting-edge weapons, rolling over the Soviets with ease. That's the Hollywood version, fueled by decades of Cold War propaganda and German generals' memoirs that blamed their losses on Russian winters or endless hordes. But let's talk facts. In June 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, the Red Army was no pushover. According to historian David Glantz, the Soviets had around 23,000 tanks, with about 12,000 stationed in the western regions. That's more tanks than any other army in the world at the time. Compare that to Germany's roughly 5,600 tanks, many of which were light models like the Panzer I and II, already outdated. The Soviets also had about 20,000 aircraft, though many were older models like the I-16 fighter. Still, the numbers were staggering. So why does everyone think the Red Army was under-equipped? Comes down to the disaster of 1941. The Germans' lightning-fast advance, their famous Blitzkrieg, caught the Soviets off guard, and they lost or abandoned huge amounts of equipment in the western regions. Historians estimate that up to 70% of the tanks and planes in those areas were either destroyed or captured in the first few months. This created the illusion that the Red Army was poorly equipped. But here's the kicker. By 1942, Soviet factories were churning out new gear faster than Germany could keep up. By 1943, the USSR was outproducing Germany in tanks, planes, and guns. For example, in 1943, the Soviets built 24,000 tanks, while Germany managed about 17,000. The economic backdrop: USSR versus Germany. To understand why the Red Army had some serious advantages, let's zoom out and look at the economies behind the armies. The Soviet Union in 1941 was an industrial powerhouse. Starting in the 1920s, Joseph Stalin pushed hard for industrialization, building massive factories and focusing on military production. According to economist Mark Harrison, in 1940, the USSR spent about 15% of its GDP on defense, close to Germany's 17%. But the Soviets had a secret weapon: vast natural resources and a huge workforce. Germany, on the other hand, relied heavily on imported raw materials and struggled with labor shortages. The Germans banked on their Blitzkrieg strategy, a quick, decisive war. Their economy wasn't built for a long, grinding conflict. By 1941, they'd annexed Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, but those territories couldn't provide enough resources to sustain a prolonged war. The Soviets, meanwhile, pulled off an incredible feat. They relocated entire factories to the Ural Mountains in Siberia, far from the front lines. For example, the Kharkov tractor plant, which built T-34 tanks, was moved to Chelyabinsk, nicknamed Tankograd. By 1943, it was pumping out thousands of tanks a year. This industrial resilience gave the Soviets an edge that the Germans couldn't match. Why the T-34 was a beast. When German troops first encountered the Soviet T-34 tank in June 1941, they were stunned. The T-34 wasn't just a tank. It was a revolution on tracks. At the start of the war, it was arguably the best tank on the Eastern Front, and the Germans had nothing that could compete. Here's why the T-34 was such a big deal. Sloped armor. The T-34's front armor was 45 mm thick but sloped at a 60-degree angle, making it as tough as 90 mm of flat armor. German 37 mm and 50 mm guns couldn't penetrate it at most ranges. Powerful gun. Its 76 mm cannon could knock out any German tank at up to 1,000 meters. Mobility. With a diesel engine and wide tracks, the T-34 could zip through mud, snow, and rough terrain where German tanks got stuck. German generals, like Erich von Manstein, admitted in their memoirs that the T-34 was a nasty surprise. The Germans even tested captured T-34s at their proving grounds and used the insights to design their own Panther and Tiger tanks. But in 1941, the T-34 was untouchable. The German trophy hunt. The Germans were obsessed with capturing T-34s. During the chaotic Soviet retreats of 1941, thousands of T-34s were abandoned due to mechanical issues or lack of fuel. The Germans didn't let them go to waste. They repaired these tanks at captured Soviet factories, especially in Kharkov, where the T-34 was originally built. Historian Steven Zaloga estimates that the Germans used around 300 captured T-34s in 1942 to 1943. They painted them with big black crosses, even inside the hatches to avoid friendly fire, and sent them back into battle against the Soviets. Here's a wild fact. During the Battle of Kursk in 1943, one of the biggest tank battles in history, the Germans fielded 25 captured T-34s at Prokhorovka. Imagine the irony. Soviet tanks built to defend the motherland, fighting for the Nazis. It shows just how much the Germans valued the T-34. They didn't just want to destroy it, they wanted to own it. My take: why the T-34 is iconic. The T-34 isn't just a tank. It's a symbol of Soviet grit and ingenuity. It was simple to build. A single tank took just 3 to 4 days, and tough enough to handle the brutal conditions of the Eastern Front. Compare that to the German Tiger, which took months to produce and was a nightmare to repair in the field. The T-34 was the ultimate workhorse, and its design influenced tanks for decades. To me, the T-34 represents the Soviet spirit, doing more with less. When I read about German soldiers scrambling to capture these tanks, I see it as a grudging respect. They knew the Soviets had built something they couldn't. It's like the ultimate compliment from your rival. PPSH 41 versus MP 40. The real story. If you've seen war movies, you probably picture a German soldier with an MP40 submachine gun slung across his chest, looking cool as hell. That's the cinematic image, but the reality was different. According to historian Chris Bishop, in 1941, the Wehrmacht had about 250,000 submachine guns for 3.5 million soldiers. That means only 1 in every 14 soldiers had an automatic weapon like the MP40. Most Germans carried the Mauser K98, a bolt-action rifle designed in 1898, solid, but old school. The Red Army, on the other hand, went all in on automatic weapons. The PPSH-41, Pistolet Pulemiach Spadzina, or Spadzin's submachine gun, was their star player. The Soviets produced around 6 million PPSH-41s by 1945, along with other models like the PPS and PPD. Germany, for comparison, made about 1 million MP40s during the entire war. The PPSH was cheap, quick to produce, one could be made in a few hours, and a beast in battle. Why the PPSH was a game changer. The PPSH-41 had some serious advantages. Firepower. It fired 900 rounds per minute, compared to the MP40's 500. That's a wall of bullets. Big magazine. Its 71-round drum magazine, nicknamed the Banjo in the US, let soldiers keep shooting longer than the MP40's 32-round stick magazine. Durability. The PPSH could handle mud, snow, and dust, making it perfect for the Eastern Front. The Germans loved the PPSH. In 1941, As the Red Army retreated, they captured tens of thousands of these guns. Estimates range from 70,000 to 80,000 by December. The Germans didn't just use them as is. They converted some to fire their own 9 by 19 mm parabellum ammo and called them MP717R. By 1944, they were even producing PPSH copies at their own factories. The PPSH in urban warfare. The PPSH really shone in city fighting like the Battle of Stalingrad. In tight spaces, rubble-filled streets, basements, and factories, long-range rifles like the Mauser K98 or the Soviet Mosin-Nagant were less effective. The PPSH's high rate of fire let Soviet soldiers dominate close-quarters combat. The Germans, facing this firepower, started grabbing every PPSH they could find, knowing their MP40 couldn't keep up. My take, the PPSH as a Soviet icon. The PPSH-41 is more than a gun. It's a symbol of the Soviet approach to war. Mass production, reliability, and overwhelming force. It reminds me of the AK-47 that came later, simple, tough, and deadly. When I imagine a Soviet soldier charging through Stalingrad with a PPSH blazing, I see the kind of determination that turned the tide of the war. The Germans' obsession with capturing these guns shows they knew they were outclassed in this department. The winter that broke the Nazis. Everyone's heard about the brutal Russian winter of 1941 to 1942. Hitler thought his blitzkrieg would wrap up by November, with German troops chilling in Moscow by Christmas. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. Instead, temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, and the Wehrmacht was caught totally unprepared. Their uniforms? Thin overcoats designed for mild European winters. Their headgear? Flimsy caps. Their boots? Leather which soaked through and froze solid. The Red Army, on the other hand, was ready for the cold. Soviet soldiers had Valenki, felt boots, Ushankas, those iconic fur hats with ear flaps, quilted jackets, and sheepskin coats called tulips. These weren't just clothes, they were survival gear. Valenki kept feet warm even in deep snow, and Ushankas protected against frostbite. The hunt for warmth. The Germans went into scavenger mode. They looted warm clothing from civilians in occupied territories and stripped Valenki and Ushankas from fallen Soviet soldiers. Some accounts even describe Germans hunting for tulips, which were prized for their warmth. Back in Germany, they launched a winter relief program, where civilians knitted socks and sweaters for the troops. But it wasn't enough. Historian Antony Beevor estimates that 250,000 German soldiers suffered frostbite that winter, with thousands dying. The cold didn't just hurt their bodies, it crushed their morale. The Russian winter wasn't just weather. It was a weapon. The Soviets knew how to fight in it, and their gear gave them an edge. When I read about German soldiers freezing in their thin coats while Soviets marched in Valenki, I can't help but think of it as nature taking sides. Those simple felt boots and fur hats became symbols of resilience, just like the T-34 and PPSH. The Soviet industrial miracle. The USSR's victory wasn't just about tanks and guns. It was about outproducing the enemy. When Germany invaded, the Soviets pulled off one of the greatest industrial feats in history. They moved thousands of factories east, out of harm's way. According to Mark Harrison, about 2,500 factories were relocated, along with 1.5 million railcars of equipment. Places like Chelyabinsk became industrial hubs, churning out tanks and weapons nonstop. By 1943, the USSR was outpacing Germany. In 1944, they built 29,000 tanks to Germany's 18,000 and 40,000 aircraft to Germany's 25,000. This was possible because the entire Soviet economy was mobilized. Women, teens, and the elderly worked in factories while men fought on the front. Germany's economic collapse. Germany, meanwhile, was running on fumes. By 1943, they faced shortages of fuel, raw materials, and labor. Economist Adam Tooze notes that Germany spent up to 75% of its budget on the war, but it wasn't enough. Occupied territories couldn't fill the gap, and Allied bombings crippled their factories. The Soviets' ability to keep producing gave them the edge in the long haul. World War II on the Eastern Front wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a battle of ideas, technology, and willpower. The T-34 tank, the PPSH-41 submachine gun, and even simple Vilenki showed that the Red Army had tools the Nazis envied. These weren't just weapons or gear, they were symbols of a nation that refused to break. So what's the takeaway? Never underestimate the underdog. The Soviets turned their challenges into strengths, and their ingenuity helped win the war. Let's keep exploring these stories together. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into World War II and other epic historical moments. Drop a comment below. What surprised you most about the T-34, PPSH, or the Russian winter? Want us to cover another topic? Your input keeps this channel alive, so let's hear it.